record, and now I'm going to introduce to everybody Mrs. Shimona Tzukernik, or Tzukernik rather. You can pronounce it either way, I think, but she's considered one of the foremost female authorities on Kabbalah as it applies to daily life. She's renowned both for her vast knowledge and remarkable ability to make relevant the teachings of Kabbalah to each arena of life, be it career, relationships, health, education, creativity, spirituality, and beyond. Through keynotes, coaching, and her world-renowned program, which is called The Method, she delivers inspiration, insight, and practical tools to help others live their wisest and truest life. Shimon has addressed the United Nations Staff Recreation Council on Kabbalah for Global Peace and has been featured in media around the world, including a documentary by National Geographic and Take Me to Your Mother for Nick Mom TV. She's also a freelance writer and author for the Roar JLI, the world's largest network of adult education. I share with Shimona in this as well, besides the fact that we both come from the same country and share somewhat of an accent. Continuing. Using her knowledge of Kabbalah, Shimona has created The Method, and she will possibly tell you a little bit more about it through weekly teleconferences, online courses, daily lessons, meditations, coaching calls, and suggested steps, plus a lively group forum. Her transformational program guides participants to manifest their potential and live their purpose. She shares the method with others, and this method is now the subject of a dissertation, of a PhD dissertation for a candidate for PhD at Emory University. Her holistic learning experience enables both individuals and corporations to live and lead from the inside out. She also, by the way, is having a site-wide sale of her products that she produces. And if you would like to, and I would suggest that you do, have a look at the website. It's called KabbalahCoach.com.
The Kabbalah Coach.
Oh, the Kabbalah Coach. Kabbalah Coach.com. THE in the beginning. Okay, so without further ado, Mrs. Shimona Tzukernik, Dying to Live, Rabbi Shimon's Cave is a metaphor for birth and death and how this applies to our lives. Please, take it away.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Miller. And just to see Rabbi Cohen here, I don't see his face, but the little icon, wonderful, and Rabbi Silberstein, that was, as always, just wonderful. Thank you. So I'm sorry for coming on late. I had another event, but I wanted to begin by sharing a story that is told about Rabbi Shimon bar Yohai that has to do with waiting and the time that he spent in the cave. So I didn't hear the beginning. I'm not sure what everyone shared. I heard Rabbi Silberstein's, I guess, from halfway through. But I imagine everyone is familiar that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was in a cave for 13 years. He was with his son, Rabbi Elazar, and he had fled there for his life from the Roman government that issued a death sentence on him. So he was in hiding. Now his students had dispersed. They went to different places because they were running away from a hostile people, a hostile government. And one of this group of students was actually based in Tzfas, which later became a center for mystics. Rabbi Cohen is based there, and I mentioned at this art gathering on Sunday, someone there said that there's beautiful wine that is coming from the land of Israel now. And I mentioned Rabbi Cohen's very special wine from the town, from the area of these mystics. So Rabbi Shimon's students were up in the north. And there was one particular student, his name was Rabbi Yehuda, and he had a son whose name was Rabbi Yossi. And one day, it was in the Galilee. They were quite far away from where Rabbi Shimon was, not necessarily Tzfat, but in the area of the Galilee. The students were gathering and they were very upset, and because they didn't have him to ask questions to. They had been studying certain passages, and they were discussing the fact that in the Torah there is a section that speaks about curses. So this is in the Torah portion of the Chukosai, which we're going to be reading, not this week, but after. And in this Torah portion, often it's read. We have this portion now, and then later in the summer, the Torah portion of Ki Tavo, there are terrible curses that are given to the Jewish people, and whoever sits in shul and reads them, or you open up the Chumash, the Bible, you see how very difficult it is just to read through and see what is being said. So the sages were talking there, and they were speaking about the rebukes and the curses, and why would it occur twice in the Torah, even one letter? Rabbi Silberstein was speaking earlier about the sale, the acquisition of Hebron. All the places the Arabs dispute are places where there are legal financial transactions in the Bible. In that transaction, Ephron is selling the cave to our father Abraham. And in one of the places, his name is missing the letter Vav. So Rashi, the commentator, comes to tell us from this we understand that he was trying to cheat Abraham out of it, out of the deal, get more than it was worth, etc., top dollar. So even one letter in the Torah has its significance, and yet we find and hear that curses are repeated, and it's not even something positive, it's something negative that is repeated. We have the story of Eliezer going to find Rivka, and there's great significance in the fact that that story is repeated to us. So what is the reason the sages were saying that it has to be spoken of twice, particularly because that something so harsh and difficult wouldn't one time have sufficed? And the answer that they came up with, one answer that was proposed, is that the first set of curses gives reference to the destruction of the first temple, and the second set of curses that come in the Torah portion of Ki Tavo actually refer to the destruction of the second temple. But then one of the sages said, well, if that's the case, then why is it that after the reading of the curses in the earlier portion of the Chukosai, we have words of consolation? God gives us some sense of consolation. But at the end of the Torah portion of Ki Tavo, there's no consolation. And then the students of the Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon, were stumped. They didn't know how to answer. They could say, yes, well, this was the first temple, this was the second temple, but why did the second one not have words of consolation? And you can imagine, being where they were in history, that was of particular concern to them. Because what did it mean for the Jewish people? What did it mean about us going forward? So Rabbi Yehuda, he was actually the son Bar Eloi. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, he began to weep and cry. And he said, like, Veismir, why to us that this is our situation? There's only one who could have answered that to us. Only Rabbi Shimon could have given us the answer. And then what happened is that Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi's son, saw his father crying, and the anguish of his father prompted him to action. You know, sometimes you can bear your own pain more easily than you can bear the pain of someone else, and especially when those are intimate relationships. If it's for your parent or if it's for a child. Rabbi Miller mentioned this 80% discount on the site, and that was because this past week my father, soll sein gesund, he should live and be well, he suffered cardiac arrest, and his heart stopped, and they had to bring him back. And just they called me when he was being placed in the ambulance, and I don't think I ever prayed like that before. Of course, it was the most extreme circumstance that one could have. But there is that sense that you love another person's life more than your own at some level. I'm not saying in a way that is unhealthy, but we find this even in Torah, that you could cry for someone else. Don't cry for yourself. You know, when Yaakov, our father, meets his son Joseph, they cry, but they're crying for each other. Benjamin, there is pain for someone else, and we are prompted to action because of the pain that we experience. So Rabbi Yossi, he saw his father's pain, and he was just so moved. He did something that seems like it's ridiculous, but he went outside and he wrote a note on a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper he put down the questions that he had, that the Chachamim, the sages, had been discussing here. In the Chukaisat says this, and in Tavot says that, and why would it be that their consolations, but not in the second one, which is the latter one, the one that we're dealing with. And he didn't know how to get it to Rabbi Shimon. You know, sometimes you do something that doesn't make sense. It's beyond, it's nonsensical, but it's not nonsensical in a way of being below reason. It could also be from beyond the parameters of reason. So Rabbi Yossi went out and he had this note, and he looked up in the sky and he called out and he said, Dav, you took a note. You saved the people. You went out and you found an ark and a branch in the times of Noah, and you showed him that there was hope for the world. Please come and take this piece of paper that I have and bring it to the Holy Rashbi, bring it to the sage from the sages of Israel. And that dove came out of the sky, and she took that note. Now, I guess like we have even today, pigeons are used as couriers, certainly in previous times more, but maybe today people don't need actual pigeons, right? They have other techniques. But this dove took the note from Rabbi Yossi, and she went and flew to the hills of Yehuda, near Yerushalayim, where the Rashbi was hiding. And she dropped the note into the cloak of the Rashbi, and he has a piece of paper that was just dropped by this bird. Now, what we just heard, the story about the Rebbe Maharash and looking at rain and looking at material things, what Rabbi Silverstein was explaining, of course, a tzaddik, a righteous person of the caliber of the Rashbi, understood this dove was not just a simple dove. Anyway, he opens up the paper and he sees the question, and he began to cry. And his tears, like Rabbi Yossi was moved for his father's pain, the Rashbi was moved by the pain of the people of Israel. And this is the sign of a truly great leader, of a righteous person, that the pain of the people touches you in your core. And he began to cry. And he said, God, Master of the universe, what will the last generations do? What's going to happen? How will our people be consoled? Who's going to console them at this time in exile? And so Hashem saw him crying, and he turned to Yohai Navi, Elijah the prophet, and he said, I wasn't going to reveal this all the reasons for the suffering and the curses to the Rashbi, to the people of Israel. But I see the Rashbi's tears, the holy tears of the tears of the holy Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, go down and explain to him. So Yohai Navi, Elijah, came down and he appeared before the Rashbi, and he started to explain to him the meaning of the rebukes. Now, there are levels of explanation. Once he's been through the various rebukes and explains to him what the meaning in these words are, he wanted to explain this last piece about the consolation being withheld, and what are the secret allusions to the redemption that are there in these curses. Now, I'm not sure, Rabbi Miller, did someone give over the story of the Alter Rebbe at all today, talking about the curses? No one discussed the story.
No.
Okay. So there's a very interesting story that is told about the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidut, that I think it was his son. One time the Rebbe couldn't read from the Torah, and he generally would read the Torah portion, but for some reason he was not able to. And when his son heard the curses in the Torah being read, he fainted. When he fainted, they tried to bring him to, but he fainted again, etc. And eventually, when he recovered, they asked him what happened. I think it took a matter of days for him to recover. And they asked him what happened, and he said, "Didn't you hear the curses? I mean, those curses are enough to make a person pass out." And they said, "But every year you hear it." I think it was already around Bar Mitzvah. Every year you hear these curses being read. He says, "I never heard the curses before. When my Zayda, my grandfather, reads from the Torah, I don't hear curses, I only hear blessings." So of course, there are ways of relating to our curses as blessing and as sweetness. But before Elijah could reveal this to him, God took him back. He brought a wind, and this wind lifted him and took him away. And Rabbi Shimon just said, "Hashem, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? How will the people be consoled?" And really, at some level, even before we come to the end of the story, I want to suggest that it is the teachings of Rabbi Shimon bar Yohai that are the true consolation for those curses. His teachings are the answer and the explanation for all those shadows, the dark side of reality that is a part of the light side of reality. So he cried and cried on behalf of the people. And God then said to Eliyahu, "Okay, go back and reveal the answers to him." And so he did, and he told him. He came to Rabbi Shimon and he said, "Look, you can think of something as a terrible punishment and a curse, but the curse is only a hard shell that holds inside of it a soft and precious fruit. Think about a nut. So on the outside, it's tough and hard, or even just the fruit of an orange on the outside, a grapefruit, it's bitter. But you come to the inside and there's something extremely sweet and delicious, and there's a life force inside of that." So Elijah the prophet, explained to Rabbi Shimon that this is the nature of suffering. And if you're interested in exploring this topic further, chapter 26 of Tanya speaks about the name of God, the numerical name of God, whose value is 26, and tells us that the first two letters, the Yud and the He, correspond to transcendent levels of godliness that are beyond our ability to grasp. The Vav and the He, the last two letters, the latter part of the name, correspond to dimensions of godliness that we have some access to. And the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, the light, the goodness, the blessing in our life comes from the dimension of the last two letters. But the sweetest part of our life is perceived by us as coming from the dark side. We experience it as being dark. From God's perspective, it's the greatest light. So Rabbi Shimon revealed this. And Chassidut is itself Kabbalah. It's the fifth and highest level of Kabbalah. It is the manifestation of these teachings that were revealed by Rabbi Shimon. And I think in some way this story captures the essence of what his life's mission was about, the sweetening of severities. You know, in Hebrew, we've been reading recently in Torah portions that have passed about leprosy, and the blemish is called a nega. If you turn those letters around, it is oneg. Spells the word oneg, which is pleasure or delight. There's a very close connection between pleasure and delight. Even physically, a sensation that is pleasurable could become uncomfortable or even painful if it would extend too long. So in the world, you find a perversion of that. There's something called sadomasochism, where people delight in pleasure, in pain. But really, in its source, what we're seeing is that oneg and nega, the pain and the pleasure points, are very close to each other. And Rabbi Shimon was teaching this. So he immediately, once he heard this from Eliyahu Hanavi, Rabbi Shimon wrote down the teachings on paper, and then the sun started to set, and the dove came, and he took the paper and gave it to the dove. The dove picked it up and flew as with the setting sun going to the north towards the Galil. And what does she find there? She came back to that courtyard. And in the courtyard, Rabbi Yossi was standing. Now, interesting to me, just this week, I read an exercise that someone had to go through. I don't know who the person was or who the teacher was. It was just someone relating a story that had happened many years ago. Someone had taken a photography course, and they went to do this photography course, and they expected to be moving around. But the professor at this university and the teacher at the school had a bag full of beans, and took these beans and just sprinkled them around a field, and then said to the students, okay, you have to keep your foot on that beam, stand on that beam for the whole day and photograph this field. And the point was what it was like to stand in one place for a whole day, and what you notice and what you see. Anyway, our story in the Zohar says that Rabbi Yossi had been standing there since the morning. The sages were talking in the morning. He heard his father crying. He wrote the note and he sent it with the bird. And now the sun was setting, and he was still there waiting. And as soon as the bird came, he opened it up, and he went and he showed the note to his father, to Rabbi Yehuda, who showed it to the sages. And they rejoiced. It was a double rejoicing. One, because they had the answer, the depth of the answer. And two, because they knew that Rabbi Shimon was alive. This was their special blessing. So what I want to suggest, I think there's so many lessons in this story, and one, of course, is about being moved to action. When you love someone, that's part of the theme of this story, I think. That's what Rabbi Yossi did. Firstly, that Rabbi Yehuda cried. They all played their role in this. The sages wanted the answer, and Rabbi Yehuda was so moved that he cried. And he had raised a son who cried couldn't bear the pain of his father, and initiates this miracle with the dove. And then Rabbi Shimon could have just thrown up his arms in grief, and that was it, but he wept for the people and prayed, God, what will happen? And those tears brought about two revelations for him, two levels of explanation. Comes back to Rabbi Yossi, and there is salvation. To the point, we are told, that the sages rejoiced so very much, and when they went back in, Rabbi Yehuda actually says that this Rabbi Bar Yohai, in the future, Bar Yohai will be at the head of the righteous, to absorb the inner dimension of the Shekhinah and to see the Holy One, blessed be He. He will rejoice with the righteous and say, come, let us bow and kneel before our Maker. What I want to touch on is that there are ways to wait. We can wait as victims. Why is my life so hard? I want more out of my own life. But we don't take action. We can wait and complain. We can wait and be bored. We can soothe ourselves so that we don't have to feel our waiting. You know, it's possible to ignore the fact that you're waiting. And one of the ways that we do that today very effectively is with screen addiction. I was in Florida, and I was speaking somewhere, and the woman where I was speaking runs a school that has no screens in the school, which I think is just wonderful. I would get back to tactile education, books, real books, and just tactile learning for kids. Anyway, so she says to me, one of the fathers was very resistant to having his children in the school because they don't have screens. And that week, the week before I got there, the dad had come up to her and said, our children are staying in the school. So she said, what changed things for you? Why are you saying that? And he said, well, I took my son to the dentist. It's a kindergarten, nursery school. I took my son to the dentist, and they happened to have a fish tank in the office. And my kid was at the fish tank, and he was trying to swipe the fish. And then he came to me and told me there's a problem, he can't get the fish. You know, he didn't realize that tank was actually a real tank. There were real fish. He thought it was a screen. So we can soothe ourselves. We soothe ourselves with screen addiction, many different kinds of ways of waiting. But there is a waiting that prompts us and moves us to come to action. That is the waiting of Rabbi Yossi. He stood there in that field. He sent the bird. It's like you have a vision. You know, in the method we speak about intention a lot, because in Hebrew the word for intention, kavanah, is the same as the word kivun, direction. So you will go where you set your intention. You're going to lead yourself in that direction. We have to set our intention. And that's connecting with something almost at the level of your consciousness. But we also have to ground ourselves. Anyone who's listening who has done martial arts will understand that you have to ground yourself. It's like an energy that goes out of your feet. We speak about that as do think, connecting your consciousness above and grounding your feet down below. You have to be bound above and ground below. When you do that, that's my sense of Rabbi Yossi in the field, that he is bound above and grounded down below. He's not budging. When you do that, then miracles happen. God, you co-opt God to work with you in your life. And I'm not, I certainly don't subscribe to all this stuff about positive thinking in a conventional sense. God is not our cosmic bellhop, and the work of positive thinking is much deeper than what we like to think. It entails very profound connections of ourselves to God. One of our isms is believe that God believes in you. You have to believe in God, but you also have to believe that God believes in you. So, sorry about that. I forgot to turn off my phone. Sorry, folks. That's like my students who get into trouble. Believe that God believes in you. When you do that, you find that's the work. It's not just saying, oh, well, I'm going to create a manifestation board. Manifesting in your life has to do with this kind of story about Rabbi Yossi, to set your intention, to really work on that, to attach yourself to your vision and to ground yourself, to connect with the mitzvahs, to feel you bound up above to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you bound below to the Shekhinah. Then we can begin to become agents of change in this world. So while we're waiting, in that place of waiting, we have to look at our challenges, referring now to the element of the story, the explanation in chapter 26 of Tanya. We can look at our challenges as problems, or we can look at them as what I like to call in the method of growth opportunity, or your go point. Very often I'll be speaking to my clients and say, what's your go point? What's the growth opportunity here? And here comes another wonderful, beautiful teaching of the Zohar. We are taught that a cave is likened. Rabbi Shimon was in the cave. It can be likened to a womb or a grave. And many of us might think to ourselves, wow, those two are so far apart. But they actually aren't. You know, I have a very good friend who has been at numerous of her grandchildren's births. And her father passed away a while ago, and she said to me, it's the same thing. It was like a birth, but in the opposite direction. And that is exactly what the sages tell us. There's an interesting commentary on a verse in the book of Esther. So in the book of Esther, we read, King Ahasuerus ruled from Hodu to Kush, from India to Ethiopia. Now, the Ramah, Reb Moshe Isserles, who has a very mystical commentary on the book, his book is called Mechir Yayin. He's actually also wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He's a composer of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Law. But he has this beautiful commentary on the book of Esther, and he says that Hodu and Kush represent birth and death, because the word Hod is glory. Actually, tonight is Hod of Hod, glory of glory. Hod is your left hip, but the very bottom, the Hod of Hod, that is the left ankle. That's where you step off of. That most vulnerable, weakest point for a right-handed person, right? Boom. But think about it. Every army in the world starts left, 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 right, left. Or in Hebrew, small, 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 yamin, small. Every army functions like that, because that place of Hod is so vital, it's so important. So Hodu is this place of vulnerability, but also radiance and praise. So the Ramah says, Reb Moshe Isserles says, Hodu, India represents birth, and Kush, Ethiopia, is a place of darkness or blackness. And as a result, it represents death. Now, in the Talmud, there are two sages that have a debate on this verse, the very literal sense of the verse. And when you think about Reb Moshe Isserles' commentary on the Megillah, we see it in an even broader context, which helps us understand how to navigate our challenges and come back to this notion of the cave, the grave, and the womb. What's the debate? Rav and Shmuel differ. One of them says, Hodu and Kush, those countries were adjacent. One of them says they were at opposite ends of the empire, of the kingdom. Now, think about the United States of America. You could say the president rules over the people of this country as from New York to California. So there is a certain sense there of rulership that contains vast places and everything between it. But you could also say, if there's anyone listening who's not American, New York, the state of New York is adjacent to the state of New Jersey. You could say the president of this country rules over everyone in the country as he does between New York and New Jersey. And there you wouldn't have a sense of the vastness of New York to California, but you would have a sense of the tightness of rulership and reign, different. So Rav and Shmuel have this difference of opinion, and you could take it as being a socio-political statement. But of course, in the context of the Ramah, we're looking at something different here. Because on the one hand, you can say birth and death. He's saying Hodu and Kush are birth and death. Now let's couple that with what Rav and Shmuel said. Are they adjacent or at opposite ends of the kingdom? Rav and Shmuel have differing opinions. You could say birth and death are adjacent, and you could say they're at opposite ends of life. At opposite ends of life means I'm born, and hopefully 120 years later, I leave. Should be a long and good life. So then they're at opposite ends of the kingdom of my life. But I could say they are adjacent to each other. How are they adjacent? When a soul is born into this world, and I'm sure there have been a number of children born into this world while we've been on this webinar, that is a welcome celebration of life to this world. The bonding of body and soul, which Rabbi Silverstein spoke about earlier, bringing together this mysterious, it's miraculous and it's mysterious every moment, the connection of body and soul. That happens at birth. But the souls in the heavenly dimension, which are non-temporal, non-spatial, those souls are mourning the loss of the soul that has just been born. For them, it was like a death. When we lose someone in this world and we cry, that's a death, the separation of body and soul. But in the next world, the souls are waiting to greet this soul that is making a transition. In fact, one of the main themes of Hasidus is this transition between two states of being. In the method, we say, these are in our isms. You're big enough to fail, and you have to die in order to live. It's not possible. You can't live if you're not dying. The old self, the lie, has to die in order for the truth to emerge. You have to shed your skin. You have to grow out of your old shoes. All of that has to happen. So when a soul transitions in the next world, that's a birth. They're waiting to greet them. And you hear many stories of people who crossed over and came back and said, I saw a vision. There was this one, or this one was there. I had many of those stories this week because of the situation that my father has been in. And thank God he's back deep in the ring of life with us. But still, that transition is a life. And that, I think, is the deep lesson in the cave of Rabbi Shimon. He, at some level, that was like a Garden of Eden. You know, all the great leaders, all the game changers, they are all exiled. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was put on trial, totally exonerated. All of his ancestors were actually put in prison. Think about the great leaders. The world wants to beat them down because the voice of change, the herald of redemption, it's too much for us to bear. Moses was in a casket. Joseph was in a pit and then in a dungeon. Elijah was in a cave. Rabbi Shimon was in a cave. There is Abraham Avinu, our father Abraham, he was also hidden in a cave at birth. He emerged late when I think it was 3 when he emerged, but he was hidden because the voice of change that comes from the other side, from the side of redemption, encounters a lot of resistance. So Rabbi Shimon, when he was beaten down and exiled to a cave. But the interesting thing is that for him in that cave, it was like a womb. It was like being in the ark. The waters are raging. Noah was in the ark. Waters are raging, but for him, there was a tzohar in the teva. There was this luminous light that was in the teva, in the ark. So Rabbi Shimon, there was a spring that appeared miraculously. Beside it, a carob tree grew, and it turned into a date tree. Like it's special food on Shabbos. On Shabbos, that carob tree would become a date tree, etc. His experience, of course, his consciousness shifted that, but it is metaphoric for us as well to say, I'm going to be in a cave at certain points in my life or certain points in my day, and how am I going to navigate that? I can make it into a grave, and I can make it into a womb. You know, I once taught, and I had checked things before I taught with the rabbi. I was mistakenly given wrong information, and it was so bad I fell flat on my face, and it had really negative consequences for me. Around that time, I took the course of a woman. I signed up for this course, and it was such a scam. It was such a scam, I couldn't believe it, and it cost me quite a bit of money to get out of that. And I could have just kind of raised my hands up and said, this is the darkest moment. A number of other things happened. I fell on ice. I slipped on ice at that time. I fractured my back. I lost the use of my hand. Till today, I don't have a full feeling, but thank God it's a number of years and it's coming back. The nerves are regenerating. It was a very dark time in my life, but I kind of obnoxiously insisted that that cave become a womb instead of a grave. And I would say that as a result of those challenges, well, I was scammed, but I knew how not to run my business. I gave misinformation and became discredited for a certain while, and that compelled me to create an online platform that has been transformational for so many people. I learned a lot about regenerating nerve health as a result of it. I could go on and on. And I'm not, I'm not there. We're all a work in progress and in process. But I do feel once you've been in a cave enough times, you get to recognize exactly what it is. So I want to give a blessing, which is that we should know how to wait. We should be in the cave and know, no matter what, God is with me. Like the sages who got that note from the dove. There's the blessing of having something explained, but there's the meta paradigm, which is knowing Rabbi Shimon is alive. There is having your problem solved, and there is the meta paradigm of knowing God is with you. It's not enough to believe in God. You have to believe that God believes in you. And when you really do, that's bitachon. That is trust, not just faith. When you do that, then you begin to be the agent of change that you yearn for. So those are my words, and Rabbi Miller, thank you so much for inviting me to participate.
You're very, very welcome. I really appreciate it. It was wonderful, tremendous insights. And I'm sure that a lot of people are going to ask for your email. I hope you don't mind if I give it out.
Thank you.
Also, please go to her website, thekabbalahcoach.com, and there's a lot of information there, and well worth looking into. There is an opportunity to ask some questions a little bit later than we planned it to be, but if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We can take questions now for at least a few minutes. There was one question that came in by email, which is a little bit of an esoteric question. Somebody asked for information about the correlation or association of planets with particular sefirot. I can send you probably the information by email. I can tell you what they are if you want to. The place to look is the Shiur Koma of the Ramak, a work called the Shiur Koma of the Ramak, Siman Tet Vav, chapter 15. There he explains it that basically Shabtai or Saturn corresponds to Chesed, Tzedek, Jupiter to Ura, Ma'adim or Mars to Tiferet. Interestingly enough, Chama, Mercury to Netzach, Noga, which is Venus to Hod, today's, and Kochav, which is the sun, actually, to Yesod, and Levana, the moon, to Malchut. And the Zohar adds particularly the moon in its fullness when it's a full moon. Okay, I would probably send it to you if you ask, because that's a lot of information to grab just like that. The source in the Ramak again is called a book called Shiur Koma, which has never been translated into English as far as I'm aware. Shiur Koma, chapter 15. Okay. Any other questions? No, everyone has their answers. Okay. Very nice. Okay, so folks, I will post this all online, probably not tonight, but maybe tomorrow or the next day, and it will be available. Just go to my website for the link or to the YouTube channel, if you know where that is. Alrighty, again, very, a tremendous amount of thanks to the panelists. I think Rabbi Amichai is still here. Thank you again. To Mr. Tzukernik, thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Rabbi Eli had to drop off, and see you again. I think this was only a beginning. I hope that we'll be able to do it again sometime. I don't have any specific plans, but I have to talk to people involved and see if they would be interested. It is a way of spreading out the ideas in an interesting format. It could be that what we might do the next time around is just have a Q&A session, all your questions, and we will have a panel of people who may be willing to answer if we can. That would be an interesting possibility. Okay, folks, good night, and thank you again for attending, and have a great Lag BaOmer.
Amen, amen. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks all. Good night again. Bye now.